Why is silence so rare? Silence is a very specific type of CC, is kind of the answer. It's like, silence is, it's you can move, but you can't cast spells, right? Which, in some situations, is the akin to a hard CC, even if you can move. Like, if you put a silence on an assassin, they might as well have just stunned you. Because they jump in, you can't cast spells, and then they kill you because you can't flash away, right? And so there's a lot of cases where silence isn't a good idea because it's basically just a hard CC. And then in other cases, like, silence is pretty cool, but it's just like, yeah, it just depends on the character. It's a more niche CC. It's just not as useful or make sensical on many characters. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I probably could use silence a bit more than we actually do. When can we get a new Ari skin? Let's just make 200 of them. Why is sleep so rare? Well, sleep is a relatively new mechanic. Sleep originally we didn't make because it has gameplay problems with teammates. And specifically is you sleep someone and then your teammate wakes them up and then you hate your teammate. That's kind of like the potential problem with sleep, right? Is it's just like you slept someone and you wanted to keep them asleep, and then your teammate's like, Lamau, how's about no? And then everything like falls apart, right? And so in original League of Legends, it was like, hey, maybe we should avoid that kind of mechanic. But then, you know, we got Zoe and Lilia, and these mechanics actually work pretty well on them. So I'd say it's like, you know, sleep was just something we didn't explore as much in early League of Legends that probably has more potential than we gave it credit for. And, you know, Lilia and Zoe have kind of showed that, like, yeah, you know, with the right kit and the right incentives, like, sleep is pretty good. So even though there's, like, definitely some, like, teammate issues there, it's pretty sweet overall. Is there a balance reason Kalista doesn't have an execute indicator for her spear stacks? Yeah, so if Kalista had an execute indicator for her spear stacks, it would just completely remove the gameplay of the spear. It would basically, like, guarantee that Kalista would, like, be able to kill you perfectly every time. Like, it's just like, okay, she's attacking you, and oh, now she's got the indicator and you die, right? And, like, you know, we can do that for certain characters. Like, we do this for Cho'Gath or Pyke or something like that. But in Kalista's case, like, we want part of the gameplay about Kalista to be understanding, you know, getting a feel for how many spears you have in someone and getting a feel for, like, when is the correct time to push that button. Like, that's a skill test we ask Kalista players to engage in. And then on the playing against side, it means that, like, Kalista isn't going to perfectly execute you every time, which gives some more, like, leeway to actually play against her as well. And again, depends on the character. Like, you know, Cho'Gath, we're like, well, you can just read the tooltip and know when he's going to execute you, so we might as well show you, right? Whereas Garen, it's like, well, actually, it's a skill test on Garen, since it's kind of like unclear how much, you know, his ultimate is going to do in any given instant. Like, knowing as a Garen player, you know, how close you are to getting that execute on someone and, like, estimating it and then using it at the right time. You should play more Balloons. I should. Balloons is a good game. It's fun. Very cool. Very enjoyable. Yep. Any more good questions here? Why did AATROX lose his passive where he could reduce shields? AATROX lost his Mutilate passive where he could reduce shields and healing because he did too much. So when AATROX came out, he was a massive pro problem. He was like a character that, like, we constantly had to nerf, like, patch over patch for pro. He was, like, somewhat similar on release to, like, Zeri or Kassanti or Akali or things like that. And so he ended up needing some, like, pretty real work to, like, make sure he wasn't just the best thing to pick every game. And one of the things we did to, like, make it so he was more balanced is to remove mechanics that just kind of said, I don't care who you are, I win. And so an example of the Mutilate passive he had, he basically said, like, does your character rely on healing or shielding? Doesn't matter, I win, right? Because he had that passive. And so by removing that, what it did is it opened up another class of characters that could potentially fight him. And one of the things when a character is 100% pick ban in pro, one of the things that tends to be going on is they lack weaknesses and win most of their matchups, especially if it's a top laner or something like that. And so by removing that passive from AATROX, it allowed us to lower the number of matchups that he was just going to come into with a big advantage. So it's stuff like that. Like sometimes when a character in League, especially if they're like really powerful in Pro, is too versatile, one of the things we'll do is remove mechanics that just like make them good against certain types of people to then be like, okay, there's less matchups, you're just going to win because of this mechanic. What about support Fiddlesticks? What about this guy? What's he max? He maxes W, not Q. Q max is even higher win rate than W. Okay. So you go support Fiddlesticks. You max Q, and you 2.25 second targeted fear the enemy AD carry. And they just can't play the game. Right? How could that not be OP? That's got to be crazy. Like, it's got to be so good. I should try that out. I should try some support Fiddlesticks. I feel like this guy might be underrepresented in the support role right now. Nasus support does the same with W. I played some Nasus support before. I played it against Zeri once. Nasus support against Zeri is hilarious. You ult her, she ults, you W her, and you just leave. And then she's like, I'm a useless character. It's great. 10 out of 10. Nasus versus Zeri. Trust. Very strong. Why does Samira W not block Jin W? Technically, it's correct. Jin W isn't a missile. And so the reason Samira W doesn't block it, technically speaking, is because Jin's W isn't a missile, so Samira's W should not block it. The more deeper explanation, though, is why does Yasuo's Wind Wall block it? It's because it looks like a missile. And so when we were making Jin, we special cased Yasuo's Wind Wall to beat Jin because it was like, hey, this looks like a missile, so it should be blocked like a missile. And it turns out the way we special cased Wind Wall to be beaten, to beat Jin's W is really weird and really specific in a way that doesn't really work for something like Samira's W. And so it's kind of a thing where it's like, it's technically working correct against Samira. We made it a bit blocked by Yasuo because it visually looks like a missile, but the solution that we have to make it work versus Yasuo is very, very, very specific in a way that doesn't work for Samira. I think it was Senna who just ignores it. Yes, that's because Senna like doesn't shoot missiles. The difference between Senna's autos and Jin's W is... Oh, that's Valorant. The difference between Senna's autos and Jin's W is Senna's autos don't look like missiles. They're just not missiles. Whereas Jin's W looks like a missile, even though it isn't.